Ending stories is hard. Ending anything is hard. Reality is often disappointing, and events usually don't play out the way we envision them. Things usually get messy, but that's life. The same is true in the world of television media. Audiences have been inundated with countless TV shows of outstanding quality, only for them to fall short in their conclusions. Ending a narrative that spans several years of development is not an easy feat, but there is a distinct outlier in this category that managed to circumvent the dreaded ending dilemma, a show that didn't fall short, one that ended just as strongly as it began. That show is, of course, Breaking Bad. Considered by many to have one of the greatest, most satisfying television endings ever, Breaking Bad stands in its own category as a serial drama. But how'd the team behind this show manage to pull off such a difficult task? Well, I think there were a few factors that led to this show's success, which we'll be diving into with this video. But wait, that title and thumbnail had 2 shows in it. How's The Walking Dead fit into this equation? I see Walking Dead as the antithesis to Breaking Bad. Both of these shows began airing on AMC more or less around 2010. And they each left a substantial impact on mainstream media. However, the legacies of these two properties couldn't be more different. Breaking Bad is remembered fondly, and there are still new viewers tuning into this show daily, even though it ended a decade ago. Whereas The Walking Dead only ended its run last year, essentially dying several times in the process, but it was continually resurrected despite its blatant fall from grace. This show stumbled on for 11 endless seasons, while Breaking Bad ran for less than half that time. 177 episodes, 62 episodes. But quantity does not always mean quality. To be clear, this video isn't going to be an outright dunk fest on The Walking Dead. This show was, at a time, my favorite piece of media anywhere, and it still holds a special place in my heart. But that doesn't blind me to the fact that this series essentially ran itself into the ground, and they're still trying to launch spin-off after spin-off out of this world. My goal is not to needlessly roast The Walking Dead. I want to determine where this show went wrong, and how these issues could have potentially been prevented. Comparing these two properties highlights an important lesson I think more people could take note of when it comes to long-form storytelling. This essay is going to be broken up into chapters, and it will, of course, feature spoilers. So if you haven't watched Breaking Bad yet, what are you doing? Go watch it! Add this video to your watch later list, watch through all of Breaking Bad, then promptly forget this ever exists as you pile video after video on top of it, never to come back. But if you have watched Breaking Bad, well then you're in the right place. What about if you haven't finished The Walking Dead yet? Well, that one's actually a bit more understandable. I mean, I just spent 7 months watching this series in its entirety, and from what I can surmise, not many people stuck around to see the ending of this show, if you can even call it that. I do think the earlier seasons are well worth a watch, but it's really up to you. I won't be diving into every single facet of these stories from start to finish because that would just take forever. Think of this more as a general analysis of the structure these two shows followed. First, I'll be evaluating Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead on their own. Then we'll compare notes and see how this whole thing goes. Sound good? Alright, let's get into it. Breaking Bad. What is there to say about this show that hasn't already been said? It's incredible, a masterclass in television writing that pioneered a new mode of thought when developing characters over the course of a series.
He wanted to change the main character throughout the course of the series, which has never been done in series television. If you look at Archie Bunker, Tony Soprano, or whomever, they are the same people. They react to different stimulus, but they are the same person, whereas Walter White was going to change from a good, honest guy to becoming a killer.
And because of this, it's recognized by many as the GOAT in the world of television. This show has been dissected and analyzed in a million different ways, which means there isn't a whole lot I can add to this conversation. But I can share the story of a chubby boy who was introduced to this show and how it shifted his whole perspective on TV. I was the chubby boy, by the way. I discovered Breaking Bad circa 2012, after it began streaming on Netflix. Ironically, my brother was actually the one who started watching it. Whenever he would put on an episode, I'd occasionally sit in and watch with him. Then my dad started the series, and I did the same thing. Sure enough, my mom also jumped on the bandwagon. After each family member watched through the show with me as a spectator, I managed to piece together the narrative from the episodes and plot points I'd happened to catch. And it was really good. The only reason I didn't sit down and watch it myself was because I was a busy 13-year-old, man. I was playing Minecraft and watching PewDiePie videos, okay?
Don't you dare bleed on me, Bob! I will fucking kill you if you die!
When the 5th and final season rolled around, My whole family sat down and we watched it together. To our surprise, the show actually ended strong, like really strong. Dare I say, Breaking Bad ended perfectly when so many other TV shows had missed the mark. It always intrigued me why this show ended so soon, if it was still going strong. Even though it essentially had the perfect ending, my underdeveloped 13-year-old brain still wanted more. It wasn't until 2 years ago that I revisited the show on my own terms, finally experiencing Breaking Bad in its entirety. And one fact became very clear to me. Breaking Bad did the best thing it could have possibly done. It ended when it needed to end.
We're done when I say we're done.
See, television is rife with shows that drag on way longer than they should in a brazen attempt to squeeze out as much money as possible. When this happens, the audience can usually pick up on it. We all know that feeling when a beloved property's soul is ripped out and it becomes nothing more than a husk of what it once was. Breaking Bad strayed away from this business model. The opposite direction, actually. The creators didn't try to stretch this story out for another 2 or 3 seasons to cash in on a series that literally just hit its peak. No, it's crystal clear from the pilot all the way to the finale that this is a story about Walter White, aka Heisenberg.
You're goddamn right.
Can we talk about this cast for a minute? So much of this show's humanity and authenticity stems from this incredible group of actors in front of the camera. Pretty much everyone here brought their A game, and even the smallest characters serve multifaceted purposes to the overall narrative, while still having it feel natural. Let me really stress that last point. It feels natural. It's one thing to introduce a character in order to move the plot forward, but it's another thing to integrate them into the story, having them serve the plot in an entirely believable way. Of course, Bryan Cranston is front and center of this pack. Walter White is as much a part of Bryan Cranston as any character can be for an actor. Throughout the 5 seasons, not once did it feel like Cranston was tired of portraying Walter, or that he was phoning in his performance. The same goes for Aaron Paul as Jesse. He proved to be a fan favorite, and the fact that he essentially came out as the sole survivor shows just how much Jesse's character grew throughout the series. By now, it's a pretty well-known fact that Jesse was originally intended to be killed off at the end of season 1, so it's a testament to how charismatic Aaron Paul is as an actor that the narrative was not only altered to keep him alive through to the end, but that he essentially became the heart of the show.
1, 2.
This is my own private domicile and I will not be harassed! Bitch!
All of these characters are living and breathing people. Even the outlandish caricatures like Saul and Tuco still feel real in the world that was introduced to us, one not too far off from our own. The brilliance here is that these characters are drawn from real people we often find in daily life. Slimy, fast-talking lawyers exist on billboards along every US highway. Unhinged drug kingpins exist in boastful buildings of downtown cities across the country. And mild-mannered men who have let life pass them by, wishing they'd realized their potential, exist all around us. Although the general premise of a high school teacher turned drug lord is somewhat far out there, it was tethered to reality through real-world archetypes.
I'm thinking maybe you and I could partner up.
This level of consistency never faltered over the course of the series, and every new addition felt smoothly weaved into the narrative. But why don't we talk a little bit about the actual man who brought us this story? Of course, you can't really discuss Breaking Bad without also mentioning the show's creator, Vince Gilligan. Gilligan was responsible for setting this series up to be the best possible version of itself. Yes, filmmaking is an incredibly collaborative process, and there are hundreds of people who help bring shows like this to life. But, as the showrunner and creator, Gilligan was the one who steered this ship. His witty, outlandish, yet grounded style is soaked into every episode of this series. It's clear from interviews and Q&A panels that Gilligan, among all of the show's writers, continually reminded himself what was buried at the core of this show. The North Star guiding this series was always Walter White's evolution into Heisenberg. Anytime the writers felt they were straying too far from this arc, they went back to the drawing board. What resulted is an airtight story that continually feels like it's barreling toward the next major event, while still giving the small moments their due diligence.
You got me.
Seriously, my roommate is rewatching Breaking Bad right now, and every time he has it on, I find myself getting sucked in. It's like every moment, every breath of air this series takes is crucial for the events that occur thereafter. Now, there is no way this was the exact story Vince Gilligan had envisioned before starting the series. Like I said, Jesse was supposed to die off early and Tuco was supposed to live longer, among other substantial changes. But what's surprising is that despite these alterations to the story, the show never suffered.
Tight, yeah!
For example, Tuco's death was not intended to happen so early, but the actor behind him, Raymond Cruz, felt he couldn't play the part anymore due to the mental toll of having to wield such a character. An actor wanting to step away from their role, leaving the writers to shift the narrative could have felt sloppy and a little contrived. But this didn't end up that way. Tuco's death felt like a natural progression that needed to happen when it did. It led to this fantastic moment when Walt sees Hank right in front of him, hot on his trail. And the firefight with Tuco set Hank's PTSD arc in motion, which is further explored when the twins attack, another plot point set in motion as a result of this scene. This crucial change honestly feels like it worked in the story's favor, rather than act against it. This is just one example, but it shows how flexible the writers were, while still weaving all of these components into the narrative as a whole. The show feels dynamic, fluid in its nature, but it never loses sight of the tone and story progression. Much of that comes from the legwork done throughout the series to hint toward future events.
Flower called Lily of the Valley. It's like common. It's got these red berries on it that I guess taste sweet, and sometimes little kids eat them and wind up poisoning themselves, and that's it. Nothing more.
Breaking Bad utilizes truly effective foreshadowing constantly, which is why it's so satisfying when these moments finally do play out. When such a high level of importance is attributed to these small details and encounters, the audience feels like their time to watch the show is being valued. It doesn't feel like your time is being wasted with meaningless filler episodes. Man, I must be coming down with something. Hardly anything convenient happens for these characters as they progress through the story. Quite the opposite, actually. There are so many instances when things are going right according to plan, only for one small hiccup to create a domino effect, setting the next arc in motion. I have no doubt there were issues and hiccups in the creation of this story to have it turn out the way it did, but the writers found a way to minimize the weaknesses and play up the strengths. The only Deus Ex Machina moment this series could have had was promptly rejected, signifying to the viewer that this series would never be taking the path of least resistance. I'm gonna be honest, this section might get a little messy, kind of like the show, ironically. There's just a lot to cover with this series. It's also much easier to focus on the negatives rather than the positives. But like I said, The Walking Dead was once my favorite TV show around, and I know I'm not alone in that regard. This show started out swinging, able to hook a loyal audience right off the bat, but the momentum captured in the earlier seasons slowly began to wane as this show trudged on for over a decade. A lot of this is going to sound negative toward The Walking Dead. That's because it kinda is. I feel the need to point out all of these moments where the show stumbled because it highlights what went wrong behind the scenes. But since I started the Breaking Bad segment with my own personal introduction to that series, it's only fair I do the same for The Walking Dead. Unlike Breaking Bad, I began watching The Walking Dead from day one. I remember the tangible hype behind this series weeks before the premiere on Halloween of 2010. To preface, I was not a huge horror fan back then. I mean, I was only 11 at the time. We're talking about a kid who was absolutely terrified to go outside after watching Shaun of the Dead. But I always had an interest in zombies. A lot of that was probably because of Call of Duty zombies. Also, my dad was always a pretty big horror fan, so I would begrudgingly watch a scary movie here and there. With all that in mind, The Walking Dead was definitely on my radar, but I still wasn't sure I wanted to watch it. Fast forward to Halloween night, and my dad recorded the pilot. Yes, this was when recording was a thing, and he asked if my brother and I would watch. I said what the heck, because I was 11, so we sat down and pressed play. As the clock struck 11:36 p.m., the credits began to roll. And the past 90 minutes have been terrifying, yet magnetic. I was hooked. The Walking Dead jump-started my adoration for zombie stories, which still continues to this day.
I hate coconut, not the taste, consistency.
There's not a lot of bad things I can say about Season 1, or any of the earlier seasons for that matter, but I firmly believe Season 1 is a masterpiece, and maybe 90% of that is the nostalgia talking. But the story told in these 6 episodes is extraordinary. The acting was phenomenal across the board, with the most notable performances coming from Jon Bernthal and Andrew Lincoln. Jon Bernthal ate this role up, essentially serving as the first antagonist in a long line of antagonists. Although he was only in 2 seasons, his presence echoed throughout the whole series. And of course, Andrew Lincoln is Rick Grimes. He never pulled his punches. His mannerisms, speech patterns, and characteristics became so memorable over the course of the series.
Oh, no.
Season 1 felt more like a really long movie rather than a season of television, and this arc could have even stood alone as its own narrative. But we know the series did not end here. The show continued on with seasons 2 and 3, which were also pretty top tier, and in no time, The Walking Dead had conquered television. It basically became the new Breaking Bad, but even bigger.
They're fucking with the wrong people.
How's that saying go though? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. I watched The Walking Dead pretty much religiously all the way up until season 7, after one pivotal story moment. You probably know which one I'm talking about. Glenn's death. The show had been building up to this moment for a long time, and when it finally came, it was actually not too bad. However, it was the execution of this moment that really pissed people off. See, they led up to this all season, then when it was finally the time of reckoning, they ended with a cliffhanger, leaving viewers to wait months for an answer as to who died. The show was already on rocky ground after the reveal of Glenn's fake death just 9 episodes prior, and this only added fuel to the fire. By this point in the show, the constant frustration of the audience had also been building up since around season 4, when they started experimenting with perspective shifts in the narrative. This could be jarring at times, and it took away from the moments that people really wanted to see, but none of this was as much of a disservice to the fans as Glenn's fake-out death and the season 6 cliffhanger. When season 7 finally did roll around, it was revealed that not only Abraham died, but of course, Glenn died too. I think killing 2 characters was a good way to shake up expectations, but no matter how this moment played out, it didn't seem to warrant the wait. Like, why didn't they just kill Abraham at the end of 6 and then surprise everyone at the beginning of 7 when Glenn dies too? I think making this simple change would have pissed off a lot less people, and it might have saved some face for the creators. Because this is ultimately when people really started to accept the fact that this show was now more about high viewership rather than compelling storytelling. This series is plagued by moments where they could have avoided backlash, but they chose to go for cheap shock value. I got a few episodes into 7, then just fell off and stopped watching altogether. It wasn't an intentional decision, I just felt my time was better spent elsewhere. And from what I've heard, I think a lot of people stopped watching the show around this point too. But now, after experiencing the show in full, I can confirm that the plot really does start to flounder around from season 7 onward.
See this? This is the kind of thing that just tickles my balls.
A lot of people hate that they killed Carl off for the mid-season finale of 8, and I agree with this sentiment. Rick, and by extension, Carl, were the driving forces behind this story. The whole premise was centered around Rick's family, but once Lori and Carl had both died, it gave Rick a lot less to fight for. Yes, he had Michonne and Judith, but this never felt as compelling because the foundation of this series was built upon his family in season 1.
You're a cop. All I am anymore is a man looking for his wife and son. Anybody gets in the way of that's gonna lose.
Once Rick reunited with them, the story evolved to focus on his efforts of becoming a better father and husband, which we know he struggled with before the apocalypse. And with the comics as a general outline for the show's story, it seemed like Rick was going to teach Carl how to become a good man in an evil world. He was going to be a positive influence in Carl's life to essentially build a better future. But this went out the window with Carl's death. Despite all that though, I actually think they could have made Carl's departure work if they had ended the series with season 8. It seems like a lot of people regard season 8 as the worst season, and trust me, I can see why. The war between the factions was really long, and it quickly became just one giant logistical nightmare. So many convenient things happened to make all of the necessary pieces fall into place, especially with Negan always slipping away at the last minute, like a Tom and Jerry cartoon.
Simon, that is the taste of shit!
But there were some aspects of this season I did like. The characterization of Dwight in both 7 and 8 was amazing because he started out as a complete prick, but then they flipped his character entirely and he became one of my favorites. I also love how they played into this dynamic between Dwight and Trevor.
Take off your pants.
Simon, when they had the same goal of taking down Negan, but couldn't trust each other to do so. This is pretty good stuff, man. It's layered, complex, and so much more interesting than the incessant firefights. I feel this season finale ended strong because it subverted expectations in a good way. It was not the all-out war many probably suspected it would be. The whole thing was over in mere minutes. Was it also a little convenient? Yes, but by this point, almost everything in the series was. At least Rick was finally able to defeat Negan, and it was really satisfying, especially because he chose to spare him in honor of his son. Combined with the flashbacks of Rick and Carl, just beautiful. I didn't love all of season 8, but I felt the finale wrapped things up so well, and it almost made me forgive all of the contrivances it took to reach this point. I think this would have been the best ending the series had going for it. Carl may have died, but at least his death would have meant something. It really felt like his character arc had been completed, even though he wasn't physically there to see it through. But then it just kept going with season 9 and so on. The series has a habit of building up these arcs to relative success, then they just keep going, and it dilutes everything. There's only so many times Rick can go off the deep end, pull himself back, then fall off again, and come back another time. Same is true for Morgan, who straight up lost his shit multiple times. This dude was so unhinged he should have been in an asylum, my guy. They had to stop him from just killing everyone. The writers undid a lot of the work they put in to make him a peaceful, changed man, despite any major breakthroughs in the narrative.
We can be better than them.
We are better than
Not if we kill.
12 seconds later.
Morgan! Stop! Morgan!
Season 9 started off feeling somewhat fresh and kind of reminiscent of Season 1. I actually thought the show might have turned a corner with a brand new showrunner, style, and even title sequence. I mean, seriously, this title sequence is beautiful. It took me by surprise, and I thought it might signify a bigger change for this series. But that allure quickly wore off with Rick's departure in the 5th episode. This felt totally out of place, seeing as this man went out after falling on a metal stake. And I know he didn't actually die, but like, that's what they wanted you to think building up to it. It was painfully clear that this was not a creative decision, but instead because Andrew Lincoln was tired and wanted out of the role.
Yo, what's up? Yeah! I got your crumpets.
From there, the Whisperers were introduced, and I'll be honest, I originally wanted to trash on them way more, but I cut a lot of it out. I actually hated them though, and not in a good villain kind of way. Alpha, Beta, all of them. There was no narrative legwork to establish what these characters were capable of doing. Look, at a certain point it felt like there was just an endless supply of saviors, no matter how many were killed off, but at least they were well established and it was clear they had access to a ton of weaponry, so a lot of what they did seemed plausible. But we didn't get any of this with the Whisperers. There was hardly any evidence to support how smart and strategic this group was. They actually seemed more like a bunch of bumbling idiots. Not to mention, Alpha and Beta just killed members of their group like every 5 minutes. This didn't make me believe anyone would actually be loyal to them. I couldn't have been happier when Alpha died because she was honestly just insufferable. I'm not trying to discredit the actress who played her, Samantha Morton. This is strictly about the character. Same goes for Beta. It was so annoying how this dude just kept coming back from the dead. And like, how did he just dig his way into Alexandria? I get that he's supposed to be like a walker and that he's kind of Michael Myers-esque, but this didn't feel natural at all. Dude was just a walking plot hole. The only interesting thing they did with his character was hint at his past as a famous singer. But beyond that, whack. Also, Michonne just pulls an Anakin, then dips for the rest of the series. Wait, is that King Batch? What? Seriously though, how are we supposed to get on board with this cast after Rick's departure if they also just disappear for entire episodes or even seasons at a time? This show honestly started to feel like an adventure of type of thing, rather than the horror drama it started out as.
Anyone have an extra canteen?
I thought the show was dead after season 10, but surprisingly I found myself enjoying parts of 11. Still, it was painfully inconsistent. I liked the conflict with Daryl's love interest, Leah, and the Pope dude. Wait.
He was in the blood and the horror and death. There.
Anyway, the Pope was really compelling as a menacing cult leader, but then they just made him go full villain out of nowhere, and then my dude just gets whacked anyway.
They whacked him. They fucking whacked him. Fuck.
After that, the main conflict was pretty much just with the Commonwealth, which I didn't find particularly interesting. Not to mention, the only reason they ended up finding the Commonwealth was because a literal Soviet satellite crash landed and Eugene was able to build the radio from the parts. Talk about plot contrivances. This is something I could never have seen realistically working in the first few seasons, but at this point, the show had established itself as something entirely different. I thought the fast forward moment to show Daryl and Maggie on opposing sides was actually really interesting, but that ended up just being another fake out too. It seemed like they were going to build up the tension between these two after Maggie killed Leah's people, but Daryl forgave her pretty quickly and he took out Leah without much hesitation. I think it would have been really fresh to turn some of our beloved characters against each other in the vein of Civil War, but when push came to shove, they just remained on the good side. No blurring of lines here, nothing new, just good versus bad, and good wins in the end. Part of the allure with seasons 1 and 2 was because Shane was a villain you could understand. He was a layered character, and he was arguably right at times. But as the show progressed, the villains just became more and more villainy, and there was less room for gray area. Season 11 started out feeling like it might try to tap into those roots from earlier seasons, but then the villains just evolved into blatant bad guys. From about halfway on, the plot of season 11 just kept unraveling. I feel like they tried to do way more than the budget could handle. which is why the Commonwealth Guards looked pretty cheap and the explosion at the end was eh. I also liked how they constantly stated that the Commonwealth population was like 50,000 people, but the only evidence we ever saw of this was the same town square with probably a few hundred people. They simply bit off more than they could chew, and it became clumsy. Daryl even exclaims they ain't the Walking Dead.
We ain't the Walking Dead.
Which completely contradicts Rick's line in season 6 when he says they are the Walking Dead.
We are the Walking Dead.
I liked Rick's version more, by the way. And the walkers just conveniently begin to evolve into smarter variants, which is why they're able to break into the Commonwealth. We saw this hinted at in the first season, but then they proceeded to shelf it for basically the entire series until the very end.
There was a lot of discussion about not breaking the rules because these rules were established in the beginning of the show.
This is a great example of bad foreshadowing, because it's very clear they didn't use this plot point until it was convenient for the narrative. And even after all that, when the series finally does end, it doesn't even really end. They instead decided to build up all of the other spin-offs coming out after this. So you basically go through 11 seasons just for it to feel like a commercial of what's next, while hardly anything gets wrapped up in a satisfying way. As the credits began to roll on the 177th episode, a thought occurred to me. In an attempt to do everything, they essentially achieved nothing. With each season that passed, The Walking Dead began to feel bloated and aimless. It eventually ended up a far cry from what it once was. The tone shifted many times and the narrative went in radically different directions to keep it feeling fresh. When Rick stumbled upon the first horde in Days Gone By, it was terrifying. But by the final season, these dudes really just be walking with walkers like they're a minor inconvenience. I know this was never a show strictly about zombies. Even Frank Darabont said that. We'll get to him in a second. But I still feel like any threat the walkers posed dwindled season after season. Again, it became clear the walkers would only appear when it was convenient for the plot. The entire show adopted this convenience mindset, and it suffered as a result. So how'd this vicious downward spiral from season 1 even happen? It's almost like the showrunners changed the whole goal of the story after it was already established. Oh wait. The inception of the Walking Dead TV series was spearheaded by this man, Frank Darabont. Darabont shaped the story of the first season, and I feel the foundation he laid down is what propelled the show for so many seasons that followed. Darabont put his heart and soul into the first season, and it showed. That's why, at least when I watch it, there's just a magical quality here. I don't know if any other moment in the whole series evoked as much emotion from me as this scene when Rick finally makes it back to his family. And this was only after 2 episodes of knowing these characters. There was a pure honesty and earnestness within this season. It felt alive, not dead. Of course, the creator of the comic, Robert Kirkman, was also involved in the development, but Darabont was the one altering the source material. The ending of season 1 is very different from the ending of volume 1 in the comic, and I think this decision was justified. It meant that the show wasn't beholden to the comics entirely, and they would be free to experiment. Unfortunately though, Darabont was booted off of the show after season 1 because AMC wanted to double the length of the season while cutting the budget in half, even though the first season was wildly successful. Great play.
I think it's time that we all start to just consider the other possibilities.
Okay, there were also rumors that some people were unhappy with Darabont's working style, potentially even Kirkman himself. Now, I don't think Darabont is some sort of saint by any means. It sounds like he might have been very difficult to work with, and there's even some emails he supposedly sent threatening people. But I do think this came from the high tensions behind the scenes. AMC was making Darabont's job as showrunner increasingly difficult, and it sounds like many departments of the crew were basically doing their own thing, disjointing the development of season 2. They eventually removed Darabont entirely and continued on like it never happened. Also, conveniently, the 3 actors who were most devoted to Darabont were also killed off within about a season or so after his departure.
We created this beautiful thing. Frank was the one who brought us in.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna go to war for this guy, and you went to war for this guy, and Jeff DeMunn went to war for this guy, and we lost that war.
That war, dude.
We
got pulverized.
Lost that war.
Interesting.
Despite all of this, season 2 actually turned out pretty great. It's probably my second favorite season in the series, and it has one of my favorite episodes, 18 Miles Out. You know, the one that has that moment where Rick goes,
Stop acting like you know the way ahead, like you know the rules. There are no rules, man. We're lost.
No, man.
Regardless, it's always unfortunate when drama behind the scenes affects the work itself. I think this show maintained its stride several seasons after Darabont's departure, so it's clear he wasn't solely the reason it was great. However, he established this world and set the tone in such a visceral way. I think he deserves a lot of credit for doing so. It's no wonder more than a decade later, the cast still talks about season 1 and the magic that was there on set. Norman Reedus has been featured heavily in every season of this show, but it's funny that he kept talking about season 1 in his discussion with John Bernthal.
Yeah, I'm still doing this show, and I'm still talking about those days to everybody that'll listen. It's just, it's not the same. I don't know, it just meant something different back then. We cared about the job, we wanted it to be good. You know, we had Frank, you know, it was Frank fucking Darabont. It just felt so real and so good.
I really wonder what a 6 or 7 season Walking Dead series under Frank Darabont would have looked like. It seemed like he had big plans in mind for this story, but they were ripped away in favor of the product we ended up getting. What could have been? In many ways, Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead mirrored one another during their stints on air. However, there were a few key differences between these two properties that caused such a divergence between them in the end. From the very first scene, Breaking Bad began at a high caliber of storytelling, but it struggled to reach viewers early on, narrowly dodging cancellation several times. The Walking Dead also started out a high-quality show, however it had massive hype behind it and it basically became a hit right out of the gate, continuing to grow its viewership season after season. Both shows started out more or less centered around one man, trying to provide for his family and simply survive. Walter White is introduced as a fractured man, but he ultimately finds himself in the end, albeit essentially turning into a monster along the way. Rick Grimes starts off the series as the good cop, stoic hero, but over the course of the series he is continually put to the test and broken down as a character. Breaking Bad is the birth of Walter White, and The Walking Dead is the deconstruction of Rick Grimes. These are both compelling character arcs that informed where these two stories could go. Breaking Bad fulfilled this arc within its final episode, but The Walking Dead lost its founding protagonist 2.5 seasons before it even ended. There was a clear goal and ending in mind with Breaking Bad, while The Walking Dead resisted any semblance of an ending. Frank Darabont might have had one in mind, but that's why they whacked my guy. I think Walking Dead's early success might have even been what led to its downfall. Because it had caught so much wind, the producers wanted more control, shaping it to become a money-making machine. Whereas Breaking Bad was just lucky to get renewed season by season, until it finally caught mainstream attention toward the end. The showrunners behind Walking Dead adhered to the old television formula, which was to run a show as long as possible until viewership died down. After that, it's spin-off time, baby.
My name's Daryl Dixon.
Breaking Bad, on the other hand, paved the way for something new. The creators wanted to tell a story, evolve a character. They succeeded in this goal, essentially altering fundamental aspects of television storytelling forever. This series also had its spin-offs, but they were never a core part of the package. El Camino and Better Call Saul are supplemental to Breaking Bad, not essential.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do.
The Walking Dead ultimately lost its identity along the way, whether that was an intentional decision or not. I understand that the later seasons were supposed to show us the new world, but the evolution to get there wasn't established enough in my opinion. It seemed like they were trying to do too much and too little at the same time. The quiet, thought-provoking moments of the series were replaced with loud, bombastic action set pieces. The fear induced by just a handful of walkers was replaced with literal hordes that soon felt empty. The tension and nuance, once crucial to the story, was drowned out by the need to make each season bigger and better. There's a reason Breaking Bad saved some of the loudest and most explosive moments of the series till the very end. The creators knew that the more you cash in on big moments and events throughout a series, the less impact they'll inevitably have over time.
You want your money, right? Huh? You wanna know where it is? You pull that trigger, you never.
Slight tangent here, but we're seeing this same dilemma play out in real time with the MCU. Once a box office behemoth slinging out billion-dollar film after billion-dollar film, the MCU seems to have fallen from grace. The recent movies have been inconsistent at best, and audiences have begun to turn on the franchise. While it was once cool to like the MCU, it's now cool to hate on it.
Pickle cheese that boy, egg on that curry, yeah that boy. Oh hit that boy, oh dirt that boy, stink that boy.
But what if the MCU had ended with Endgame? Would that have left a stronger legacy behind? Sure, they might have missed out on a few $1 billion, but what good does it do to continue a story if you ruin public perception of the whole franchise in the process? Will people revisit the MCU even if it's currently going up in flames? Only time will tell. I do think the MCU might be a victim of its own success, just like The Walking Dead. What makes Breaking Bad so special is that this series ended at its peak, and it chose not to stay a moment longer. In doing so, Breaking Bad solidified itself as one of the greatest television shows of all time, maybe even one of the greatest pieces of media of all time. Think about it this way, Breaking Bad's 5th season hit record highs for the series both critically and commercially, yet that's when the series ended. People were left wanting more, and I think that's the best way to end any story. Not with open-ended cliffhangers, but with powerful, thought-provoking questions that leave you wondering. Sure, it was nice to see what happens with Jesse and El Camino, but that story wasn't exactly necessary to the narrative as a whole. It essentially served as an epilogue and didn't have much of an impact on the core story. The only thing to really disrupt this show's legacy has been the recent uptick in Breaking Bad memes, which I actually made a video on, by the way, shameless plug. But judging from the comments on that video, these memes seem to have introduced a lot more people to the show than turned them off from it.
Why, hello, how you doing? How can I help?
Unfortunately, I think it's far too late for The Walking Dead to achieve the status Breaking Bad has achieved. The writers of Breaking Bad made sure that every moment in this series was dutifully earned, and they ended it before they could screw up. I don't care how good a writer you are or how good a team of writers you have, if you try to keep a story going long enough, you will dilute it with inconsistencies and plot holes. Case in point, The Walking Dead. It became clear that this show started to rely less on a reputation of quality, but instead on name recognition and outdated tricks to hook viewers. I genuinely believe The Walking Dead could have achieved a legacy similar to Breaking Bad if the show continued down its original path. Or at the very least, if the creators had chosen to end the series before it reached its dying breath. Ironically, The Walking Dead started to feel like a show that had died, but rose up from the dead and continued to shamble along until someone finally had to put it down for good. Whereas Breaking Bad was a show self-aware enough to acknowledge it could not continue forever, so it went out on its own terms, leaving the whole world caught in its wake for years to follow. I rest my case, Your Honor. The script for this video is 15 pages long, but I know I still missed so many things I wanted to cover. I'm curious to see how this comment section turns out though. I may have been a bit more critical on The Walking Dead than I wanted to be, but that's just tough love. Seriously though, are there actually people out there who will defend this series even in its weaker seasons? Just to beat a dead horse, I still love The Walking Dead, flaws and all, and I don't think I need to say any more about Breaking Bad. It's just damn good television. But what do you think? Have you watched Breaking Bad and or The Walking Dead? I'm sweating. Do you think comparing these two shows is fair? Do you think The Walking Dead deserves more credit than I gave it here? Whatever you got, let me know. And thank you to everyone who subscribed because of my last video. I honestly didn't expect it to do that well. I do have a lot of stuff in the works, so I'm glad you're along for the ride. Until next time.
Didn't have to waste your whole life. Shit.